There is a question almost every empath asks eventually, usually at 2 in the morning, usually after another sleepless replay of a conversation that shouldn't still hurt this much. Why him? Why her? Why did I have to go through that? Before anything good was allowed to find me. It feels like cruelty. It feels like the universe picked you out of a crowd and handed you the one person guaranteed to break you open. But what if that timing was never punishment? What if it was preparation and the pain was the tuition for a lesson no comfortable relationship could have ever taught you? Here is the part nobody tells you at the beginning. Empaths are not chosen by narcissists at random. They are chosen because they already know how to love past red flags. An empath can sit across from someone who is cold, inconsistent, even cruel, and still find the fragment of good in them worth reaching for. That is a gift in most parts of life. In this one particular relationship, it becomes the exact quality that keeps you standing in a room that is slowly emptying you out. The narcissist does not see your softness as something to protect. They see it as something to use. Not because they are evil in some cartoon sense, but because somewhere along their own story, they lost the ability to generate warmth from within, and they learned, consciously or not, to draw it from someone else instead. So picture the meeting point. On one side, a person who gives love the way a spring gives water, without checking first whether the ground deserves it. On the other side, a person who has spent years building a version of themselves that looks confident from a distance and hollow up close. When those two people collide, it rarely feels like a mistake. It feels like fate. It feels like finally being understood by someone who seems to see straight through you. That feeling is real, and that is exactly what makes it dangerous. You are not imagining the intensity. You are just misreading its source. What feels like destiny in the first weeks is often just recognition, one wound finding another wound and mistaking the ache of familiarity for calm. This is where the empath usually gets the story wrong, and where I want to offer you a different way of seeing it. You did not fail to notice the warning signs. You noticed all of them. You just decided quietly and without even meaning to that your love could be the exception. That if you were patient enough, honest enough, giving enough, you could reach the person underneath the performance. That belief is not weakness. It is the same instinct that makes empaths extraordinary friends, gifted listeners, people others feel safe around. The problem is that a narcissist does not want to be reached. They want to be reflected, and the longer you try to reach someone who only wants a mirror, the more of yourself you hand over, trying to prove your love is strong enough to fix what was never yours to fix. Contrast this for a second with what happens in a relationship built on actual safety. In a healthy connection, effort is met with effort. If you show up vulnerable, the other person meets you there, and the exchange rebuilds you both. In a narcissistic dynamic, effort is met with silence, or worse, with just enough warmth to keep you trying. That intermittent reward is not an accident. It is the exact mechanism that keeps people hooked on slot machines, and it works on hearts the same way it works on wallets. You are not weak for staying longer than you should have. You are responding rationally to a pattern engineered to keep you hoping. But something else is happening underneath all of that heartbreak. Something almost nobody names out loud while they are still in it. Every version of pain this relationship brings you is pointing at a place inside you that was already tender before this person arrived. If abandonment terrifies you, they will be the one who leaves without explanation. If you have always needed to be chosen, they will make you compete for their attention. If you learned early that love has to be earned through sacrifice, they will let you sacrifice endlessly and call it devotion. This is not the universe being cruel for sport. This is the fastest, most direct way to show you exactly what still needs your attention, because comfortable relationships rarely force you to look at your oldest wounds. Difficult ones do. That is the real reason this person had to come before the right one. Not to punish you, and not because you deserved less. They came because you could not yet recognize real love while you were still mistaking intensity for intimacy and chaos for chemistry. The right person, when they eventually arrive, will feel almost boring by comparison at first, because they will not require you to prove anything. That flatness is not a red flag. It is the first sign that you are finally standing on solid ground instead of constantly adjusting your footing to keep someone else steady. So before we go further into how this pattern actually breaks and how you stop attracting the same lesson in a different disguise, sit with this one reframe. The relationship that hurt you the most was not proof that you are unlovable. It was proof that you have spent your whole life loving people as an act of hope instead of an act of choice. And that distinction, hope versus choice, is going to matter more than anything else we talk about from here on. Because what follows is not about the person who hurt you. It is about the version of you finally ready to stop calling pain a coincidence and start calling it what it truly was, a costly, necessary education. So let's talk about what actually happens after the recognition wears off, because this is the part most people skip past too quickly, rushing straight from heartbreak to healing as if there is no ground in between. There is ground in between. It is uneven, and it is where most of the real work gets done. The first thing that breaks in a relationship like this is not your heart. It is your certainty. You start doubting things you used to know instantly, like whether you are overreacting, whether you are too sensitive, whether the version of events you remember is even accurate. This is not confusion you brought into the relationship. It is confusion the relationship manufactured, one small contradiction at a time, until your own instincts started to feel unreliable. Compare that to how trust works in a stable relationship, where your read on a situation is treated as useful information, not as a problem to be managed. The difference is not subtle once you can see it from the outside. From the inside, while it is happening, it feels like you are simply bad at reading people. You are not. You are being trained, gradually and without your consent, to distrust your own perception in favor of theirs. Here is where the story usually takes its hardest turn, and where I want to be honest instead of comforting for a moment, because comforting you too early would rob you of the actual insight. You stayed longer than the evidence justified. Most people in this position do, and the reason is not naivety. It is that leaving requires grieving a version of the relationship that never fully existed, the early version, the potential version, the person they seemed to be in the first months before the mask started slipping. Walking away does not just mean losing them. It means admitting that the story you were telling yourself was a story, and that admission is one of the most painful things a human being can do. More painful, honestly, than the leaving itself. This is the point where the empath usually asks the question that starts to crack everything open. Why do I keep doing this? Why does it always end the same way, different face, same ending, same feeling of not being enough? And here is where most healing content gets it wrong, because it tells you the answer is that you have low self-worth, as if that explains anything useful. Low self-worth is a label, not an answer. The real answer is more specific than that, and more useful. You keep ending up in this pattern because somewhere earlier in your life, love and effort got tangled together into a single idea, so that love without effort started to feel suspicious, even fake. If it was easy, some part of you assumed it couldn't be real, so you were, without realizing it, seeking out difficulty and calling it depth. Once you can see that clearly, something shifts, because now you are not looking at the narcissist anymore. You are looking at the actual mechanism underneath your choices. And that mechanism is something you can change. This is different from the story where the universe is simply testing you or teaching you a lesson through suffering, because that framing, however comforting, still leaves you passive, waiting for enough pain to accumulate before wisdom arrives on its own. The more accurate framing is that you are not waiting for a lesson to be delivered to you. You are doing the work of noticing a pattern and interrupting it, which is a very different, much more active thing. That interruption rarely looks dramatic. It does not usually happen during a big confrontation or a dramatic exit. It happens in a small, quiet moment, the kind that seems too ordinary to matter at the time. It might be the moment you catch yourself rehearsing an apology for something you did not do wrong. It might be the moment you notice you are shrinking your own plans to avoid an argument that has not even happened yet. Whatever it looks like for you, it is the same underlying event. The moment your attention moves from managing someone else's moods to noticing your own patterns. That shift, small as it feels, is the actual turning point. Not the breakup, not the final fight, not the last straw. The turning point is internal, and it usually happens before you even leave. Now contrast this with what recovery actually looks like once that shift has happened, because it is not what most people expect. It is not a sudden flood of confidence or a dramatic reinvention. It is slower and quieter than that. It looks like noticing your own reactions instead of predicting someone else's. It looks like making a decision and not needing anyone's approval to feel settled in it. It looks like silence that does not feel like punishment anymore, just space. None of this happens because you found the right affirmation or said the right mantra enough times. It happens because you started paying attention to yourself with the same intensity you used to spend monitoring someone else. And that redirection of attention is the entire mechanism of healing, not magic, not mysticism, just attention finally pointed in the right direction. This is also where boundaries stop being a concept you read about and start being something you actually practice, badly at first and then less badly, and eventually without having to think about it at all. A boundary is not a wall built to keep people out. It is closer to a fence with a gate you control, deciding who gets access, when, and how. For most empaths, this is the single hardest skill to build, because boundaries can feel, at first, like the opposite of love. They are not. They are what makes love sustainable instead of depleting, and that difference is what the rest of this story is about. Here is something that surprises almost everyone once they actually start practicing. Boundaries in daily life, instead of just understanding them intellectually in theory. The hardest part is not saying no to the narcissist. By the time you are ready to do that, the decision often feels almost easy, even relieving. The hardest part is saying no to the version of yourself that still associates your worth with how much you can absorb before you break. That voice does not disappear the moment the relationship ends. It sticks around, quieter now, but still narrating, still asking whether you are being too much, too sensitive, too demanding, simply for wanting to be treated with consistency. This is the stage nobody warned you about, the strange, quiet stage after the ending, when you expect relief and instead find silence, and that heavy silence feels almost worse than the chaos ever did. That is not a step backward. That is what happens when a nervous system that has spent years scanning for danger suddenly has nothing left to scan. Calm feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar, to a nervous system trained on unpredictability, can register as unsafe. This is why so many people describe missing a relationship that clearly hurt them, and it has nothing to do with missing the person. It has everything to do with the body mistaking peace for absence, mistaking stillness for something being wrong. Contrast that reaction with what actually needs to happen here, which is not to fill the silence back up with noise, but to slowly teach your own nervous system that quiet does not mean danger. That is not a mindset shift you can force overnight. It is closer to physical therapy for an old injury, small repeated exposures, done consistently until the flinch response finally starts to fade. Every evening you sit with the discomfort of stillness, instead of reaching for a distraction, is doing more for your healing than any amount of journaling about what happened. The insight matters, but the insight alone does not rewire anything. Repetition does. This is also, not coincidentally, the exact period where people are most likely to go back. Not because the relationship improved, and not because the person changed, but because the discomfort of healing can feel, in the moment, worse than the familiar pain of the old pattern. At least the old pain had a shape you recognized. This new discomfort, the discomfort of becoming someone unfamiliar even to yourself, has no shape yet, and that formlessness is genuinely disorienting. If you are in that stage right now, I want to be direct with you. Going back will not remove the discomfort. It will only postpone it, and it will arrive again later, usually heavier, because now it will come with the added weight of having known better and returned anyway. So what actually helps here, practically, not poetically? It helps to stop asking, who am I, without them, because that question keeps your identity tethered to the relationship even in its absence. The more useful question is, what do I actually want, moment to moment, without checking it against anyone else's reaction first? What do you want to eat, not what would be easiest to explain? What do you want to do this weekend, not what would avoid conflict? These questions sound small, almost trivial, but answering them honestly, consistently, is how you rebuild a sense of self that was slowly outsourced over months or years. Identity is not recovered in one large revelation. It is rebuilt in hundreds of small, unremarkable choices made without an audience. Here is the part that separates real healing from performative healing, the difference between actually changing and just looking like you have changed from the outside. Performative healing is loud. It announces itself. It needs witnesses. Real healing is often quiet enough that no one else even notices it happening, because it is not for them. It was never for them. If you find yourself needing your ex to see how well you are doing now, some part of the old dynamic is still running in the background, still oriented around their attention, just wearing a healthier costume. True detachment does not need an audience. It does not need the other person to suffer, to apologize, or even to notice. It simply stops requiring anything from them at all, including their recognition of your growth. This is also the point where a strange, quiet clarity starts to arrive, usually without warning. You will be doing something completely ordinary, making coffee, walking somewhere, sitting in traffic, and you will realize that you have not thought about them in days. Not because you forced yourself to stop, but because your attention simply moved on without asking permission. That moment matters more than any dramatic turning point, because it is proof that the healing was not a performance you were putting on. It was actually happening the whole time, underneath the surface, while you were busy doubting whether it was working at all. From here, something shifts in how you relate to other people entirely. Not just romantic interest, but everyone. You start noticing consistency the way you used to notice charisma. You start valuing people who are the same on a hard day as they are on a good one, instead of being drawn to whoever can generate the most intensity in a room. This is not you becoming less passionate or less open. It is you becoming more discerning about where that passion gets directed, which is the exact quality the earlier version of you was missing. The quality that made you an easy match for someone who mistook your openness for an invitation to take rather than an invitation to build something together. And it is this quiet, hard-won discernment, more than any amount of time passed, that finally makes you ready for what comes next. The arrival of someone who was never going to need convincing to stay. Here's what nobody ever tells you about the right person arriving, and it is genuinely the part that surprises almost everyone who has actually lived through this exact sequence. It rarely feels like fireworks. After everything you have survived, after the version of love that ran on adrenaline and uncertainty, the real thing can initially feel almost anticlimactic, quiet in a way that makes you suspicious of it. You keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the warmth to suddenly cool, for the inconsistency to show up disguised as something else. When it doesn't, some part of you does not relax right away. It waits. It watches. And that watching is not paranoia. It is wisdom that has finally been earned the hard way. This is the moment worth naming clearly, because it is the exact opposite of what happened before. With the narcissist, the intensity arrived first, and the substance never caught up to it. With the right person, the substance arrives first, and the intensity builds slowly beneath it, the way trust always does. There is no urgency to define things too quickly, no pressure to prove your loyalty before it has even been tested, no performance required to earn basic respect. Respect in this relationship is simply the starting point, not the prize you win after enough suffering. If that sounds unremarkable, that is exactly the point. Real love is not supposed to feel like a struggle you finally won. It is supposed to feel like exhaling. Contrast this with the specific texture of the old pattern one more time, because the contrast is what makes the new pattern recognizable instead of confusing. In the old dynamic, silence was a weapon, used to punish, to control, to make you chase. In this one, silence is just silence, comfortable, unremarkable, sometimes even restful. In the old dynamic, your needs were treated as inconvenient, a problem to be managed. In this one, your needs are just information, discussed plainly, without drama, the same way you might discuss dinner. This does not mean conflict disappears entirely. It means conflict stops being catastrophic. Disagreements happen and get resolved, instead of exploding and then getting buried under an apology that changes nothing. Here is the part that took you the entire journey to understand, and it is worth saying directly instead of wrapping it in more metaphor. The right person was never going to arrive to complete a broken version of you. If you had met them earlier, before any of this, you likely would not have recognized what you were looking at. You would have found them in some strange way boring, because your nervous system was still calibrated for chaos, still mistaking anxiety for chemistry. The narcissist did not arrive first because the universe was punishing you or testing your worth through suffering. They arrived first because that was the exact relationship required to recalibrate what your nervous system considered normal. And no amount of advice or good intentions could have done that recalibration for you. Only lived experience could. This is where the story circles back to where it started, that 2 a.m. question. Why did I have to go through that before anything good was allowed to find me? The honest answer, the one that actually holds up once you look at it clearly, is that nothing was withheld from you as a punishment. You simply were not yet able to recognize real love while your definition of love was still built entirely out of intensity, inconsistency, and proving yourself. The relationship that hurt you did not make you worthy of something better. It made you capable of recognizing something better, which is a completely different thing, and arguably the more important one. So if you are still in the middle of this, still in the part of the story that feels unbearably lonely, still catching yourself checking your phone for a name that should not matter anymore, here is what I want you to actually take from all of this. Not as a comforting phrase, but as something practical you can use. Stop asking when the right person is going to arrive, as if love is a delivery you are simply waiting on. Start asking who you are becoming in the meantime, because that is the only part of this entire process you actually have control over. The waiting was never the point. The becoming was always the point. And one more thing worth saying plainly, without the softness this topic usually gets wrapped in, you do not owe the person who hurt you your ongoing suffering as proof that what happened mattered. It mattered. It shaped you. It taught you things no comfortable relationship ever could have, but it does not require you to keep bleeding indefinitely to remain valid. At some point, and only you will know exactly when, the wound stops being evidence and starts being a habit, and habits, unlike wounds, are things you actually get to choose to put down. The empath who walks through this and comes out the other side does not come out cynical, and that is worth saying too, because it would be the easier, more expected ending. They come out clearer, not colder, not guarded in the way that keeps everyone out, just accurate. Finally able to tell the difference between intensity and depth, between being chosen and being used, between a person who mirrors you to study you and a person who simply wants to know you. That accuracy is the actual gift hidden inside everything you went through, and it is the exact quality that makes the next chapter, the real one, finally possible. So the next time you ask why the hardest love had to come first, remember this. It did not come to break you permanently. It came to show you exactly what you were never meant to settle for again, and exactly what you are finally, quietly, ready to receive.